visiting my old friend Carrie Fisher, known to the world as Princess Leia in the Star Wars movies. She's always been... She's on the edge of sanity. She's, you know, constantly... not mad enough to be committed, but not sane enough to lead much of a normal life.
When you're galloping along at a great speed, it is better than any drug that you could ever take. God, if you will, is saving you parking spots. Songs are being played on the radio for you. You're just so enthusiastic about everyone. And everyone must be enthusiastic about you. And it's just come along. I've got a great idea. I've got this unbelievable idea. Let's go to India.
Exactly.
Then you'll just start going way too fast.
Yeah.
And you're faster than anyone that you're around, and that's not fun. You're on the phone far too long, you're not getting any sleep. Nothing is going fast enough for you. Come on, keep up with me, you guys, come on. And even if it's not true that you're more talented when you're manic, you feel like you are.
Yeah, which is half the battle.
I am standing on rocks, flaming speeches to the world. You know, I have a lot to say. I have messages from deep space, in fact. And I stayed awake for 6 days, and I did lose my mind. This friend of mine says to me, "Does your doctor know that you behave this way?" What do you mean? Then we sort of have an argument, and I cry for 4 hours. And I'm unable to stop. And I know there's something wrong with that. I call this doctor, and I go in, and I see her. You know, we're talking, and I'm laughing, and I'm spinning around in chairs. And the doctor says...
That's the diagnosis. That's bipolar. That's manic depression. Carrie had years of living with such extreme moods and feelings before she got that diagnosis. She's got it bad, you know. It's not a rock star, film star accessory. It's a real mental condition that she has to live with every single day of her life. She's on medication. You have to picture what she'd be like if she weren't.
Stephen has been a problem. The letter from Gerard Horne.
That psychiatrist.
Suggesting various things, adolescent depression, mild depressive illness rather than just unhappiness. Behaviourally, he can be quite infantile. I think Mr. Fry, that's your father, may have mentioned that the advice given to him by doctors in London suggests that he might have some brain damage to account for this. That's a crude way of...
Good Lord.
We were not aware of any drug-taking or sexual offences, however.
Phew.
Oh, well, gosh, he didn't know much then.
And then the awful thing, which is the stealing, that gripped me.
You didn't need money. You didn't need to steal.
No, so odd. So you didn't know it was I who was the...
I wouldn't have suspected it at all, Stephen, no.
You laid a trap in Matron's...
We did, which Elizabeth...
That was you. You were hiding in Matron's room.
I was in her bathroom. Yeah. It was a terrible shock to see you.
Strange emotional turmoil I was in. Stealing things that I couldn't possibly want, you know. As well as stealing money, it must be said, which I did want, I suppose. Did I feel shame when I stole things? I suppose I did. But there's something very extraordinary about going through, you know, going through a room where you're not supposed to be looking for things. And it's like when you watch it in a movie, you know, when the hero's burgling somebody's flat or something. It's very nerve-wracking. Your heart is in your throat. And it's a real buzz. And considering I didn't do any sports or anything else that gave me any kind of adrenaline rush, which sport is supposed to do, maybe that's what it was. Whether it was part of a disorder that can be given a name, I don't know. It was bad enough for me to have to go to a psychiatrist anyway.
That didn't lead to a diagnosis of manic depression, probably because, like the school authorities, like my parents, and to be fair, like me at the time, why would you have thought it was anything other than bad behaviour? So I was expelled and just stumbled on, continuing to steal as I went. By this time I had progressed to credit cards stolen from the jackets of my parents' friends. This led to my next big manic episode, when I used the money in the most grandiose way.
When I was about 17, going around London on a stolen credit card, it was a sort of fantastic reinvention of myself, an attempt. You know, I bought ridiculous suits with stiff collars and silk ties from the 1920s and would go to the Savoy and the Ritz and drink cocktails. The morality of it never crossed my mind at all. I think it's more that when you're in a sort of grip of a manic fantasy, you don't really believe other people exist. You are the centre of your universe. I wanted to be in there. That's why and Stephen Fry sitting there. And the white coats are so appropriate, aren't they, the barman? But they're nurses in a wonderful mental hospital.
It didn't, of course, last. After months of travelling the country using my stolen credit card, I was arrested. I was sent to Pucklechurch Remand Centre.
So this is kind of what, in my day, would have been a long, sterile corridor with cell doors and... Wow, I mean, it's just so different. I had spent the last 10 years of my life, virtually, at boarding schools of one kind or another. So this was, for me, it was nothing, really, to be honest. It was just, instead of being called prefects or schoolmasters, they were called prison officers or screws. The only thing that really twisted my guts was my mother coming to visit on the first occasion she visited, and I used to be very keen on doing cryptic crosswords, Times crossword, things like that. And she had, all the time I'd been away, she'd cut out the Times crossword every single day. And that sort of simple demonstration of love and being there for me and thinking of me was, you know, really stuck in my throat.
How many times in your life would you have had an episode like that?
I would think 4 or 5 of that extremity. If I'm to take my past history, then I sort of believe maybe it's perhaps every 5 years a huge storm will come. I don't know, okay. But that's sort of often the way it is.
So when would the first time have been that you had a depression?
I would think it was about... 6 months before that manic experience, oddly enough.
When you've been depressed like that, what's your self-esteem like?
Oh, it's absolute zero. Stand up from a sofa and walk to the fridge is an act of unbelievable effort. Everything that happens is because you are a cunt. It's because I'm a complete wanker, that's because I'm an arsehole. You kind of almost have a Tourette's view of yourself. You think of death all the time. I mean, even if you're not feeling suicidal, you're just constantly aware of death and aware of your own death and how welcome it would be. That's when I tried to kill myself.
Right, so you'd have been...
17.
It was tablets, was it?
Yes, I took as many as I could, and as many variations as I could in order to make them as toxic as possible. Unfortunately, it just made me projectile vomit. And I do remember absolutely that it was it was a suicide attempt, not a cry for help.
Looking back through your life, just roughly how many episodes of depression like that do you think you've experienced, just roughly?
I should say 5 or 6.
Okay.
I think Nick Craddock's getting the picture, but so am I. Adding up all that extreme behaviour is making me a little concerned about what my eventual score will be. Something that always bothers me is whether I could have avoided some of these harrowing moments if I'd just been diagnosed earlier. But that's actually now a very controversial issue, because in America, psychiatrists seem only too happy to diagnose children. As a result, Susie Jensen, who lives outside San Francisco, has known for 5 years that both her young teenage sons are bipolar.
I'm Stephen Fry.
Nice to meet you.
How do you do? Thanks so much
Come
for
on in.
letting us come. Thank you.
Absolutely, no problem.
Is there a thing you can say, you know your child's bipolar when, ...
You know your kid's bipolar when they're putting their feet through a plate glass window in a rage after they have been raging for 3 hours about something that you can't even remember what triggered. And certainly risky and dangerous behavior. I mean,
Yeah.
Ian at one point went up on, we had an A-line roof, and he went up and was trying to walk the narrowest point of the A-line, you know, with his eyes closed.
I didn't do it on the
A little
railway,
extreme,
but I used to
you know,
walk on roofs.
Yeah, you know your kid's bipolar when the behavior is so extreme that I had a neuropsych evaluation done on Ian.
Yeah.
And when I went to get the results of the testing, the psychiatrist, he met me in the lobby. He said, you know, I've just, in all the years that I've been doing this, I haven't been this concerned about, you know, the results. And he went on to tell me a story that Ian had told him about he was walking into a room with bare feet and could feel a sensation under his feet that he couldn't recognize. Until all of a sudden he looked down and realized that it was my dismembered body all over the floor that he was trotting over. Now that is...
Yeah, you don't want to hear that, really, do you?
Concerning.
How old is he then?
6.
6 years old. Do you ever enjoy your mania, or do you find it a real
No,
tough?
I don't.
No.
I mean, I don't like it.
No. So when you're doing something like bad, like throwing something or fighting
In a bad mood in a fight or something.
Yeah. Do you feel that's you and that you're right to be in a bad mood and the rest of the world is
I do.
is shit?
I do sometimes, yeah.
Yeah.
I do.
Diagnosed at 11, Ian's now 16. By that age, I'd already been expelled from school, so listening to him reminded me of my own attitude.
It's actually, it's a drive. It's like it's feeding some need that he has.
Yeah, that's what I
think.
think,
You can see
too.
it. You
I
can
think
see it.
It's... Yeah, it is kind of a drive, something I need, something that happens.
Ian's brother Todd is 13. He was diagnosed when only 8. His behaviour, even at the special school Susie has managed to get both boys into, is causing problems. While I'm with her, she's called to the school.
I'm normally not here until 2:30, but I got a call from the administrator saying that Todd had had a difficult morning and had actually, unfortunately, thrown a chair at a staff member and hit him.
Was there a reason were you just cross?
I was just, I just wanted to take a walk because I was kind of feeling pumped and angry, and they wouldn't let me do that, and so I just kind of got mad.
You just got, frustrated.
Yeah, and hurled the chair at the guy.
And I was about, I think it was about 8 or 9, and there was a nurse at my school, and I was trying to do my laces up, and she told me to do double laces, and I didn't know what that meant. And I actually slapped her right across the face. And I've never known anything like that absolute rage inside me. And it's really, and it was such a stupid thing because she'd told me how to do my laces up.
After a blow, especially a major one, very often he'll just shut down like this. I mean, I know that he's suspended for 3 days.
He's been suspended for 3 days.
For 3 days.
I know Todd's school sees it as bad behaviour, but I have to say I feel a twinge of sympathy. I recognise the rage, being in the grip of powerful feelings, and the shame that comes afterwards. But Todd and Ian are different from me in one key respect at the same age. They know they have an illness. On the other hand, I know from speaking to psychiatrists in Britain that they don't agree with labelling children at such a young age. The norm in Britain is 19. So I wanted to speak to the consultant who diagnosed Ian and Todd.
You having fun?
Kiki Chang is well placed to talk about this because not only does he run a research project at the prestigious Stanford University just outside San Francisco, but also he has a 2-year-old child and knows that some of his colleagues were diagnosed as young as that.
Once you get down to, say, age 2 or 3, it's very normal to have complete discontrol over your mood. Tantrums and crying one minute and laughing the next minute. But I certainly have colleagues who are clear that they see it in 3-year-olds even. Certainly I have seen children who I think were 4.5 who fit the bipolar criteria. They're having wild mood shifts and they're having unsafe behavior, they're not functioning, they're not developing correctly, they're losing a lot of time in their normal development.
Everyone remembers the rise of ADHD over the 80s and 90s. And indeed, the cynics would always say, well, this is the new fashionable label to put on a bad kid, a disruptive kid.
I want to be careful to say that. I don't think we're overdiagnosing. I think that by increasing the diagnosis, you're catching more people. It's good because then it leads them to a bipolar diagnosis and they realize that there's something going on that may be treatable and it's not their fault.
Ian, come take your meds.
For Kiki Chang, diagnosis is good news. For Ian and Todd, it means medication. Ian showed me just how much he takes every day.
Welcome to our pharmacy.
That's what I like.
We're proud of it. It's beautiful.
So you've got Prozac, Lamictal, Adderall, Klonopin's like a tranquilizer type?
Yes.
I can tell they help me behave when I'm having a hard time. This is Ambien, which I take...
Oh, sleeping pill, isn't it?
Yeah, and Concerta, which I take in the morning. Concerta is, that's like Ritalin, kind of.
Then surely that's a good conclusion. So would I have wanted diagnosis at 16 if it meant being on medication since then? I feel that in some ways I've been helped by my manic depression, and that complicates my view. Would I have had success without it? But the worry remains for bipolar parents. Will I pass it on? And now for bipolar mothers, researchers have made another devastating discovery. Pregnancy itself and the act of childbirth are now proved to be enormously dangerous to the mental health of women who are already bipolar.
So when I saw you, Gaynor, I said that, in my opinion, the risk that you had of becoming unwell again in pregnancy or certainly following the delivery were very high. I think probably 60% or more is the kind of rate of risk that you'd need to think about.
Gaynor Thomas lives in Wales and is part of the same research study that I'm involved in. She's trying to decide whether she dare risk getting pregnant again, knowing that her manic depression has already led to unusual behaviour.
See, that one goes there. I think that's better. There we are. There's one there, look.
I had kind of delusions of grandeur.
Did you believe you were richer than you were, or better born, or that you were, you know, some people believe they're princesses, or...
Mine were quite religious in nature. One of the episodes, I thought that I was one of God's chosen people, for want of a better word. I thought that I was able to heal people. I thought I had kind of special powers, and I thought that I'd kind of been sent to gather together a group of people to change the world in some way. I was seeing a psychotherapist at the time, and she identified that my ideas were becoming very strange and called in what would have been the equivalent of the community mental health team, who treated me at home.
Yeah. With medication?
With medication, yes.
Right. And then came a very traumatic thing, a very wonderful thing for most people, which is pregnancy.
Yeah.
And you did have a manic episode while pregnant. And how did that show itself?
The more religious side came in after I'd had Thomas.
Right.
Oh, well, I just thought he was not just a special baby, but a very special baby.
But sort of like a messiah?
Almost to that degree, yes. And that I'd kind of been chosen to give birth to him, and together we were going to change the world.
It's such a small step, and yet it's such a huge one in terms of embarrassment, if you were to say it at a party. You know?
Yes.
There's a way of saying, my child's the centre of my universe, and saying, my child is the centre of the universe. Yeah.
Initially it was kind of postnatal euphoria, but it became postnatal mania. I couldn't sleep. I was so excited, called the psychiatrist and said, I think I need to see somebody because things are kind of getting out of control.
Gaynor was sectioned in a psychiatric hospital for a month. The drugs the hospital put her on calmed her down, but now she's frightened that it might happen all over again if she gets pregnant. Ian Jones told me Gaynor is right to be scared.
Women with bipolar disorder are at very high risk of having a much more severe episode of illness in relationship to childbirth, often with psychotic symptoms like hallucinations or delusions. And really these episodes can be some of the most severe episodes of illness that we see in psychiatric practice.
Really? In all psychiatric practice?
The last two confidential inquiries into maternal death have showed us is that Suicide is now the leading cause of death to women around childbirth in this country.
Gaynor wants Thomas to have a brother or sister, but Ian Jones's information is hard to ignore.
And it made me just rethink the whole idea of having a baby. I'm sad that I won't be able to have another child. Perhaps for Thomas's sake. But I've got to accept that the risks are probably too high.
Down the stairs we go.
It takes me the better part of an hour to stand and fill both of their medications.
All of that to take the edge off a 16-year-old's wilder behaviour. What I think, I'm not sure. I know British psychiatrists are concerned about the harm strong drugs might do to young brains, especially when they're not 100% sure the diagnosis is correct. But if the drugs help Ian and Todd to avoid wrecking their lives, and their mothers, then surely that's a good conclusion. So would I have wanted diagnosis at 16 if it meant being on medication since then? I feel that in some ways I've been helped by my manic depression, and that complicates my view. Would I have had success without it?